Hello and welcome to this episode of PMC Studio, the interview show for Portland Media Center's Studio Workshop. I'm Cindy C., your host for this episode. Each episode is an interview with someone doing interesting things in the greater Portland community, while people who want to learn how to use our studio and its equipment get experience taping the show. Today, we are interviewing Jacob Moeller, a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby and Managing Associate for the Center for Transportation and the Environment. How are you doing today, Jacob?
I'm doing very well. I'm thrilled to be here.
That's great. It's nice to have you here. So tell us about yourself. Who are you and what is your profession?
Right on. Well, I'm Jacob, very new to the Portland area. I just moved up here in the beginning of January, so thrilled to be a part of this PMC crowd, get to know you all, and have the opportunity to tell a little bit about my story. Before Portland, I lived in New York, working with a company called Rose & Co. in investor relations, but recently moved up here as part of a career transition, trying to reorient myself a little bit towards the climate space.
So you started your career on the West Coast as someone who managed finances for California school districts. What was that experience like? Yeah,
certainly. I think that's a very generous way to describe it. In college, between my junior and senior year, I interned with a nonprofit in California that offered scholarships and mentorship services to low-income students looking to go to higher education. So I was just a summer intern helping manage their scholarship allocations, making sure that students in the program were paid on time appropriately to line up with tuitions and all that, but had a great fortune of working. The organization was called 10,000 Degrees,
nice.
And they do remarkable work, help support kids, provide the resources to get kids through college that may not otherwise be able to.
Nice.
So,
that sounds like a really rewarding opportunity.
It was. Learned a ton, and thrilled to have that be a chapter of my own.
Yeah, it's always nice to help other people. It's a feel-good thing.
Do good, feel good.
Yeah.
Always.
So why did you decide to move over to the East Coast?
I went to school in upstate New York. I attended Colgate, studied econ and psychology, which I loved, and coming out of that, so that's what drew me east initially. From there, got the job in New York, so lived in Manhattan for a few years following. And with grandparents in the Boston area and some other family, decided to stick it out. I love the seasons, fall colors can't be beat, and have loved my time out here. My parents still out on the West Coast, so they're far from home, but loving my time.
Nice. So which companies did you work for, and what type of work did you perform in the Big Apple?
In the Big Apple. So coming out of college, I got a job with a group called Rose & Co. that does investor relations advisory, which is big terminology, but in essence, we provided consultant services for public companies who were trying to tell their story of why buy my stock as opposed to anybody else's. And my job was advising how do you tell a compelling story. So storytelling at the end of the day, which I really much enjoyed. And the example I always do is cookie companies. So if Cindy's cookie companies wanted to tell why us, I would go look at Oreo and Chips Ahoy and Tate's and see how they message themselves to cookie eaters.
Yes.
Or in this case, purchasers of cookie stocks. And I would come back and say, you only talk about chocolate chips, but cookie eaters love Snickerdoodle, and really you do Snickerdoodle better than anybody. So you should put that at the forefront of your story. It's what people care about, and it's what sets you apart. But that's what I did for 3 years in Manhattan, is told investor narratives. But after 3 years, realized there is so much that impacts stocks outside of compelling stories that I found it hard to gauge impact, and felt a little misaligned with what I really was passionate about in my free time, is this role of sustainability. And decided I needed to make a personal leap and put my professional time also in that arena. And that's what ended up getting me out of New York. I did a little bit of travel in between, but now landed here in Portland and working on the Center of Transportation and the Environment, which has been an excellent transition and some great experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really important job to have, and skills to have right now, especially in our current political climate, the way things are going. It's really nice to have people fight for the environment. Right?
Yeah.
So how would you compare and contrast the working environments of California and New York and maybe even Boston and Portland, Maine? And was there a noticeable difference in pace or expectations of your work?
Interesting question. I think New York certainly has a reputation for a reason, particularly working in the world of finance and consulting, and there is a high bar for expectations and pace, and some of occasionally work-life balance is not as high on the priorities list as maybe in other places, cities. And I don't always know if that's a city specific or more industry specific. But relative to my work in California, I think, granted my role in those companies was a little, being an intern and all, was less sophisticated, so thus expectations were more, I had the opportunity, focus more on learning.
Yeah.
But in now this transition up to Portland, I've loved, the company I work for is based out of Georgia, but national organization. So my work now is fully online. But I find that I've struck a more healthy balance, I believe, in my professional life now.
I agree. I think working online at home is a lot less stressful, and I would think being in the city and running around and having deadlines and be a little more, probably quite a bit more stressful.
Sure, on occasion, and but similarly, I think, and it speaks to the transition, but feeling aligned with the work itself, I'm less counting the hours of the day and more just all in on the projects and the work and compelled to do them intrinsically beyond pay or client demands or what have you.
Nice, very nice. So what was your approach to addressing market strategy and client management for Rose & Company? Yeah,
interesting. I think I may have spoken to it a little bit through that cookie analogy, but really we were trying to help companies tell stories, and that was my role specifically. The organization more broadly also set up meetings, so we'd put you in contact with people that cared about that industry or that story. And this may bleed into the transition that I then made, but I also had the opportunity to help on any side projects, and one being in the realm of sustainability. ESG, environmental social governance, is a word that's tossed around, but being a corporate advisor, ESG was very much on the mind of people while these told these stories. So, hey, we're a good company because, and we can point to X, Y, Z to say, we are careful about our waste, we provide equitable pay, we hire diversely, et cetera. And I had the opportunity to dig into some of these for clients and say, hey, to improve on these metrics in the ESG world, you could do these 10 things. And I repeatedly saw the programs or the projects that were implemented were always those that best improved the image and not created the largest impact. Because being a messaging arena, they're still trying to tell a compelling story at the end of it. Everything fell through a PR lens. How do you align your projects with your brand image, your stock's image? Less concerned with the impact, that actually cleaning up your waste or implementing more broad diversity programs are intrinsically improve the company up for their own right. So in feeling a little handcuffed in being able to create that sustainable impact, certainly played into why I ended up making the career change thinking through the lens of fiduciary responsibilities. It's pretty hard to get anything done.
Yeah, right. So I understand you said you spent some time in Boston too. Your grandparents live there. Would you like to, what do you think about Boston? And
Yeah, love Boston. If you go even further back on my own personal journey, I lived from the age of 3 to 12, about 20 minutes outside Boston. My parents then relocated going into middle school. So I say I'm from California, but really split coast, and then making the transition for college, ended up sticking out here. But my grandparents, are still in the Boston area, as are my aunt, uncle, cousins. From Portland, it's now wonderfully accessible, down there visiting when I can. And
you can take the train.
Yeah, the train, the bus.
Yeah.
So that has been a huge perk of now living in Portland as well, as having the family close by, that network, and
And
truly loved
what
it.
town in Massachusetts did you grow up in?
I grew up in Newton, but the family is now in Lexington.
Oh, okay.
So
Nice towns.
Shot heard around the world. All that good stuff.
Yeah, I know all those towns. I'm from Massachusetts myself.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, but the other part, like next to New York State.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
grew up out in the boonies, and
Sure.
but it's nice when you're a kid. You know, you
Loved it.
have the woods as your backyard.
Yeah, run around, lots to explore. No, cannot. Incredibly fortunate, all through and through. Both where I began, the journey in between, and so thankful for where I'm at currently, and excited for what lays ahead.
Yeah.
It's been a series of change this last few months, but
a lot of good culture too in Boston area. So
yeah, and
that shines through.
I'm sure they stole a lot from Maine, so it balances out. Lobsters and such.
Yeah, I heard at one time Maine was a part of Massachusetts.
Yeah, the original 13.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe, but I mean, there's just that little tiny piece of land of New Hampshire.
Yeah, separating it all.
Yep.
I know, they stuck out their little pinky in Portsmouth just to steal some coastline.
Right. I live there too.
Yeah.
I think we're going to go to a break.
Okay.
And we'll come back in a minute and ask him some more questions. Hi, I'm Cindy C., and welcome back to PMC Studio, and with my guest here, Jacob Moeller. So, getting back to our questions here. To get into your climate activism now, what was the initial spur of that, and why did you decide to get involved with climate change organizations?
Certainly. That's an excellent question. And I got to attribute to Probable Futures, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes climate literacy. And they have an excellent online platform which translates these climate models that are predicting how our planet will continue to warm into interactable maps. And I had the fortune, luckily stumbled upon a webinar where the founder of Probable Futures was speaking about how, as we cross some of these thresholds, we are currently leaving a period of climate stability that has been consistent for the entirety of human civilization.
Yeah.
And because we've been so fortunate to build this society and civilization in a band of such stability, that we have ingrained climate assumptions into everything we do, into where crops grow, into where storms occur, how much rainfall will happen in an area, how much snowfall, how many days over 100 degrees an area will have, and in all of these, how severe, how much rainfall, how much snow, how much droughts, how hot. Will it only cap out 100 or more? And it has factored into the breaking points of our asphalt and this air circulation cooling systems we put into the schools, and on and on and on. And in hearing this talk, it was the spark. I spoke about my previous work. I had noticeably reached my limit. I was looking for a change, and I listened to this talk, and it resonated on all the right frequencies of, this is inevitable.
Yep.
But actionable, something we can act
Right.
on now. So I decided to go all in on it.
Nice. Nice.
And try to harness the storytelling I learned and some of the financial acumen from my 3 years at Rose & Co. and my experience beyond in school, and try to figure out how can I reapply these
Yeah.
in a space that lets me account for that change
Right.
that is coming.
And I think that's so important. I remember hearing first about climate change when I was in like junior high Catholic school back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
I'm showing my age here a little bit, but I think it's so important to, back then it was a theory, you know, but that sounds about right to me, you
Yeah.
know, and we started recycling back then in the 70s, and the environment was super important back then, and I think it's so important for like the younger people, like your generation. I mean, I'm assuming you're younger than me, to really get involved. Yeah, climate. I think it's like the #1 issue that's going on today. So, another question for you. You started this part of your career with Terra-Do, an educational platform for informing people about climate change impacts. What was your experience like working there as a Learning for Action Fellow?
Yeah. Well, to your comments, backing up one step, to your comments on hearing about this in the 70s and 80s, of like my discovery of this specific talk and Probable Futures work was the catalyst for my personal leap. But these conversations have been happening well before I entered the scene or decided to jump aboard. So I'll speak to it as we continue on, but I give a ton of credit to the people that have been working on this for a very long time, and tremendously admire those that have committed themselves before it manifested in the ways that we are starting to see, where it feels easy for me to jump on board because I see the fires in LA and the floods in Spain, and I can directly connect the dots and say, okay, well, it's a now problem.
Yeah.
And there are people that had committed their lives to it when it was, this will be a problem in my kids' generation, my grandkids. And that is also true for me now and everyone, that it will continue to be a problem in future generations, but it is also manifesting right now. And so I'm always amazed at people that saw these signs crystal clear on the horizon. And through that transition, Terra-Do, as you mentioned, is a learning platform, educational, climate-oriented education platform. And they operated a fellowship, which was 3 months, where it's a professional transition fellowship. So 3 months focused on the climate science, the different verticals of first starting with what's the problem, why is it happening, and then looking at the solutions. Okay, what can we do about it? So that, following my departure from the job, I quit over the summer. I did a little stint of travel, and then I enrolled in the program last fall. So I just graduated. And the spark to getting involved there was realized in transitioning into climate, it's not as easy as just raising your hand and saying, I'd like to work there now. You got to demonstrate interest, and I felt ill-equipped to handle some of these problems. It is like beyond just seeing the news blurbs, wanting to actually know what's going on behind the scenes and figure out how Jacob, could specifically help.
Nice, very nice, So you left Tiradu recently and became a managing associate for the Center for Transportation and the Environment, working on helping schools electrify their transportation and funding research for transitioning away from fossil fuels. What was that? What has that experience been like so far?
Yeah. Phenomenal, period. Coming out of the Tiradu program, I was looking for work and in this space and trying to figure out what would that look like, what kind of climate is huge, and this problem is multifaceted, many-faced, and there's tons of avenues.
It almost seems overwhelming.
Very overwhelming, yes. And I credit a ton to the program at Tiradu and to others that help break this big monster into bite-sized chunks, and then you can figure out which look interesting to you to try to tackle and add to. For me, one was electrification, in that as we transition to renewable sources, be it solar or wind or nuclear with an asterisk, but all of those don't involve combustion. So if we want to use those energy sources in our cars or our houses, isolating it to those two, we have to electrify these things first. Because that has to happen in parallel with cleaning up the energy sources. And so I got very fortunate to get involved with CTE, Center for Transportation and Environment, which is one of the nation's leaders in electrifying buses. So they work with municipalities all over the US and help them think through, okay, if we have buses that carry people all over town, what steps do we have to take to electrify this? Where do we have to put our chargers in? What are the limitations of an electric bus? There certainly are many, and there's some places that it's not always feasible. They don't do super well in cold environments. I know Portland actually had two that I think the CTE helped implement before my time. But it's a challenging transition, challenging but new transition. So I'm thrilled to be a part of that and help work through the kind of initial kinks as the technology rapidly improves and people get on board that there's benefits to electrification beyond global warming as well. It's children's health and cleaner, quieter streets, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I've noticed in my travels, like, a lot of major cities have electric buses now. And
that's phenomenal.
when I was a kid, it was diesel fuel. So I'm going to ask these questions kind of fast now. We have maybe like 5 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So while advocating for climate action, you must have met a lot of interesting people. Are there any that have left a significant impact on your perspective of the world, and who are they?
Wow, that's a great question. I have felt incredibly fortunate there are phenomenal people in the climate space, and that is one thing about the transition that has continuously baffled me, is the reminder that it's not a zero-sum game. There's very few sharp elbows. People recognize that every incremental person adds to the cause, and this is a collective effort. So that up front, and through that, I've had the fortune of speaking with, I'm trying to think of who comes quickly to mind, but most recently, Mike Munsell, who works with an organization called Heat Map News. So being in a media platform, he helps run a group that puts out climate-oriented news, and I think they're a phenomenal group in doing true, thoughtful science, but also making sure all the pieces tie together. And then most recently, I point to here in Portland is a chapter for Citizens Climate Lobby, CCL. So that's a group that I got involved in moving up to Portland through the TERRA program, realizing that the onus of climate change, of tackling climate change, has increasingly been put on the individuals, the consumers at the end of the chain. You must recycle, you must cut down eaten beef, you must use reusable
Yeah.
bags. And those are all great. They move
Yeah,
the
it's
needle,
little things, yep.
but it's incremental. And if I talk you into using a plastic bag, a reusable bag instead, it's all individually in small sphere of influence. Me,
Right.
my immediate crowd,
Right.
their friends, etc.
Yeah, yeah.
And if that whole goal is to reduce the use of fossil fuels, we're operating in these very tight circles. But if you are the board of Exxon or what have you, you wouldn't go tell your friends, hey, drive an SUV, hey, put your trash in the recycling. You would go talk to your policymaker or create an ad campaign that operates at the political and the social and the cultural level. So I realized these are such outsized impacts that I need to go figure out how to operate at the political and the social level.
Right.
And CCL is the leading group doing that in the name of climate and a livable future. So
Nice.
thrilled to get involved with them, and the people there are excellent.
Nice. Is there any advice that you may have for our watchers who may want to become interested in wanting to help the cause of fighting climate change?
Yeah.
I think you just mentioned
Yeah,
some,
I
like
guess I
using
got
reusable
ahead of
bags
myself, yes, I don't mean to pull the attention away from those personal actions, because it is. But I think people are incentivized both by, I think there's a key part of efficacy that gets diluted. Efficacy just in that, how is your impact actually being measured? Like if I wash out my yogurt cup and that goes in, it is a good movement in terms of defining good and bad in terms of less pollution, more pollution.
Yeah.
But it's incremental. It's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
And people, I think too frequently, climate conversations orient around the idea of a sacrifice. You have to give up something, give up beef, give up your diesel car, give up, walk more. And I think I am a glowing optimist about the future, and that this
Yeah, it's
transition, if we get it right, would be
Yeah.
incredible.
And sometimes just those little things you do that add up after a while. It may not seem like much, but just, every
Yeah.
time I try to recycle everything.
Yeah. No,
and I compost and everything just to cut back on the waste stream.
And just engage in the conversations around it as well.
Yeah.
Like I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to sit here and chat with you and the PMC team about this work. It's something I've enthusiastic about, and hope to continue to share.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for all that good information you gave us and for coming here today and being our guest. It's been really nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
And I wish you much success here in Portland.
I appreciate it.
I really like what you stand for. So that's it for this edition of PMC Studio. We're proud of our brave studio workshop participants who have been operating the cameras and directing the show with little or no prior experience. If you've seen anything that looked off, that's because they are just learning, and so can you. Just visit our website, portlandmedia.org, and choose Workshops on the Get Involved drop-down menu at the top of our homepage. Also, if you would like to appear as a guest or would like to interview someone for a future workshop show, please contact PMC at portlandmedia.org or Brendan at portlandmedia.org or Cindy, that's me, at portlandmedia.org, and let us know. I'd like to thank our guest, Jacob Moeller, for joining me, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Until next time.